The shattered glass of her dreams echoed through the dance hall as Theresa Reed watched her fiancé disappear through the swinging doors with another woman on his arm. The year was 1875, and in the dusty town of Cottonwood Springs, Arizona Territory, being left at a dance was more than embarrassing, it was a social death sentence. Theresa stood frozen in her ivory wedding dress, the carefully embroidered bodice suddenly feeling too tight as whispers rippled through the crowded hall. Her wedding day, meant to end in celebration at this very dance, had instead collapsed into humiliation when Walter Donovan had announced in front of everyone that he couldn't go through with marrying a woman whose father had lost nearly everything in bad mining investments. "Miss," a deep voice cut through her haze of shock. "Seems to me a lady in a dress that fine ought not to be standing alone." She turned, blinking back tears, to find a tall man with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes extending his hand. Unlike the other men in their Sunday best, he wore simple trail clothes, clean but practical, with a distinctive silver-trimmed black hat pushed back on his head. "Ethan Lawson," he introduced himself with a slight bow. "Would you honor me with a dance?" The band had struck up a lively tune, as if determined to push past the uncomfortable scene. The other guests were turning away, pretending not to stare. Theresa hesitated only a moment before placing her trembling fingers in his calloused palm. "Theresa Reed," she replied softly. "Though I warn you, sir, I appear to be bad luck this evening." His mouth quirked into a half-smile. "I've never been one to shy away from taking chances, Miss Reed." As he led her onto the dance floor, Theresa felt the weight of stares following them. The cowboy seemed untroubled by the attention, guiding her with surprising grace through the steps of the dance. His hand at her waist was respectful, steady, as if silently promising not to let her fall. "You're not from Cottonwood Springs," she observed, grateful for any distraction from her humiliation. "Just passing through," Ethan confirmed. "Delivering horses to the army post at Fort Verde. Heard there was a celebration in town and thought I might enjoy some music before heading back to my outfit tomorrow. And instead you found a spectacle," Theresa said bitterly. "I found a lady who deserved better than she got," he corrected, his voice low but firm. "That man who left, he's a fool." The dance ended, but when Theresa made to pull away, Ethan kept hold of her hand. "The night's still young, Miss Reed. Would you allow me another dance?" Something in his steady gaze made her hesitate. Behind them, she could hear her Aunt Margaret's scandalized whisper to someone about "that poor Reed girl," and what a disgrace. The thought of facing the pity and judgment of the townsfolk made her stomach twist. "Actually, Mr. Lawson," she said impulsively, "I'd be grateful if you'd escort me outside for some air." They slipped out onto the wooden porch that fronted the dance hall. The April night was cool but pleasant, the stars brilliant in the vast Arizona sky. Theresa drew a deep breath, feeling as though it was the first time she'd properly breathed all day. "Better?" Ethan asked, releasing her hand but staying close. "Much," she admitted, "though I'll have to go back in eventually. My aunt and uncle are my ride home, and they won't leave until the dance ends at midnight." Ethan leaned against a post, studying her. "May I ask what happened in there? If it's too personal, just tell me to mind my own business." Theresa laughed without humor. "Everyone in town will know by morning anyway. My former fiancé, decided that a blacksmith's daughter with a dowry that had dwindled to almost nothing wasn't worth marrying after all. He waited until after the ceremony to tell me, though. Said he couldn't go through with the rest. Right before the dance." Ethan frowned. "That's cruel timing." "Walter was always concerned with appearances," Theresa said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "I suppose he wanted witnesses to know he was the one doing the leaving." "Like I said, a fool," Ethan remarked. He straightened suddenly. "Miss Reed, I have a proposition for you." She raised an eyebrow. "Sir, we've only just met." His laugh was warm and genuine. "Nothing improper, I assure you. I was thinking that since you're stuck here until midnight, and I've got nowhere particular to be, maybe I could keep you company. Save you from having to face that crowd alone." "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because nobody should have to brave their worst day without a friend," he said simply. "Even a temporary one." The sincerity in his voice touched something in Theresa. She'd spent the past year preparing to be Walter's wife, gradually losing touch with her own friends as she focused on being the proper fiancé for an ambitious man. Now she stood alone, with no one to turn to. "I'd be grateful for the company, Mr. Lawson," she said finally. "But I can't go back in there just yet." "Then we won't," he decided. "There's a little cafe down the street that stays open late on Saturdays. Miss Reed, would you do me the honor of joining me for coffee?" Without waiting for her answer, he offered his arm. Theresa hesitated only briefly before taking it, feeling oddly safe with this stranger who had appeared just when she needed someone most. The cafe was quiet, with only a few patrons scattered at the tables. Theresa was conscious of her elaborate wedding dress, but Ethan acted as if escorting a bride in full regalia was the most natural thing in the world. He pulled out her chair with an old-fashioned courtesy that reminded her that true gentlemen weren't defined by their wealth or position. Over steaming cups of coffee, Ethan drew her out, asking about her life in Cottonwood Springs. Theresa found herself telling him about growing up as the blacksmith's daughter, about helping her father in the shop until her mother insisted it wasn't ladylike, about her dreams of seeing more of the world than just their small corner of the territory. "My father wanted me to have more than he could provide," she explained. "That's why he invested everything in those mining ventures. He thought he was securing my future. And instead he lost almost everything, and 6 months later, his heart gave out." Theresa traced the rim of her cup. "I think the disappointment was too much for him." "I'm sorry," Ethan said softly. "Is that when you agreed to marry what was his name?" "Walter Donovan." "And yes, partly. He'd been courting me before father's investments failed, and afterward, it seemed like the sensible choice. He has had plans to open a bank in Prescott. But it wasn't what you wanted." Ethan's perception was unsettling. Theresa looked down. "I was raised to believe that a good marriage was what every woman should want." "That doesn't answer my question." She met his gaze then. "No, Mr. Lawson. It wasn't what I wanted. But sometimes we don't get what we want. And sometimes," he said, "fate has a way of stepping in just when we think all is lost." They talked for over an hour, Ethan telling her about his work with the horse outfit, his travels across the territory, the sights he'd seen. Unlike Walter, who spoke mostly of his own ambitions, Ethan asked questions and listened to her answers as if they mattered. When they finally returned to the dance hall, Theresa felt steadier. The stares and whispers still hurt, but with Ethan beside her, they seemed less important. True to his word, Ethan stayed with her, dancing every dance, keeping her hand in his between songs as if it were the most precious thing he'd ever held. When her aunt finally signaled it was time to leave, Theresa felt a surprising reluctance to say goodbye. "Thank you for salvaging what should have been the worst night of my life, Mr. Lawson," she said as they stood on the porch. "Ethan," he corrected. "And it was my privilege, Miss Reed." "Theresa," she offered in return. He smiled, and in the lantern light, she noticed for the first time the exact shade of his eyes, a warm hazel with flecks of gold. "Theresa," he repeated, as if savoring the sound. "I wonder if I might call on you tomorrow before I leave town." Her heart skipped. "I'd like that." As he helped her into her aunt's wagon, his hand lingered on hers just a moment longer than necessary. "Sleep well, Theresa Reed," he said softly. "Tomorrow's a new day." Watching him from the wagon window as they pulled away, Theresa realized she was looking forward to tomorrow for the first time in months. Ethan arrived at the modest Reed house the next morning, hat in hand and freshly shaved. Theresa's aunt opened the door with obvious disapproval, but couldn't refuse him entry without causing a scene. Theresa, wearing a simple blue dress instead of yesterday's wedding finery, felt her spirits lift at the sight of him. "I thought we might take a walk," Ethan suggested after the obligatory awkward small talk with her aunt. "If that would be agreeable." "Very agreeable," Theresa said quickly, reaching for her shawl before her aunt could object. Outside in the clear spring sunshine, Ethan offered his arm. "Your aunt doesn't seem to approve of me," he observed, amusement in his voice. "Aunt Margaret doesn't approve of much," Theresa replied. "She took me in after father died because it was her Christian duty, as she frequently reminds me. She was particularly pleased about my engagement to Walter because it meant I'd be someone else's responsibility. And now she'll redouble her efforts to find me a suitable match," Theresa sighed. "Though after yesterday, I doubt any eligible man in town will come calling. They walked toward the creek that ran at the edge of town, a peaceful spot where cottonwood trees provided shade from the strengthening sun. What will you do? Ethan asked. If you don't mind my asking. Theresa had been asking herself the same question all night. I have some skills. I can sew better than most, and I know my letters well enough to perhaps teach. The schoolmistress in Pine Junction is looking for an assistant. Is that what you want to do? Teach. She considered the question seriously. I think I'd enjoy it more than being Walter Donovan's wife, she admitted. But what I truly want. She trailed off, embarrassed by her dreams. Tell me, Ethan encouraged. I want to see places I've only read about, she said finally. San Francisco, Denver, even New York City someday. I want to make my own choices instead of having them made for me. Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. Freedom's a precious thing, he agreed. Hard to come by for a woman alone, though. I'm aware, Theresa said dryly. Hence the teaching position. They reached the creek, finding a fallen log to sit on. The water burbled peacefully over stones, creating a soothing backdrop to their conversation. When do you leave? Theresa asked, not wanting to think about his departure, but needing to know. My outfit's camped about 5 miles outside town, Ethan said. I should join them by nightfall. We're moving a herd north to the Colorado Territory next. That sounds exciting, Theresa said, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. One night of kindness didn't mean anything, she reminded herself. Men like Ethan Lawson didn't settle down with women they'd just met. It can be, he agreed. It can also be dusty, dangerous, and lonely. He turned to face her directly. Theresa, I know we've only just met, and what I'm about to say may seem forward, but I've learned to trust my instincts. Her heart began to race. What are you saying, Ethan? I'm saying that I've never met anyone quite like you, he said earnestly. Someone who faces heartbreak with such dignity, who dreams of bigger things despite what life has handed her. I'd like to know you better. You're leaving, she pointed out. I am, he nodded. But I'll be back this way in about 6 weeks. If I wrote to you in the meantime, would you write back? The idea of correspondence with this intriguing man made Theresa smile. I would, she promised. Though Aunt Margaret will certainly have something to say about it. Let her, Ethan said with a grin. I'm not easily discouraged. They spent the morning by the creek, talking and laughing as if they'd known each other for years instead of hours. When it was time for Ethan to collect his horse and leave, Theresa felt a sense of loss disproportionate to their brief acquaintance. At the livery stable, as Ethan saddled his chestnut gelding, he seemed reluctant to say goodbye. 6 weeks, he reminded her. I'll write as soon as I can. I'll watch for your letters, she promised. He mounted up, then surprised her by leaning down from the saddle and gently taking her hand. Theresa Reed, he said seriously, I believe fate brought me to that dance hall last night for a reason. I intend to find out what that reason is. With that, he raised her hand to his lips, brushed a kiss across her knuckles, and rode away, leaving Theresa with the strangest feeling that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet understand. The first letter arrived 3 weeks later, carried by a trail rider heading through Cottonwood Springs. Theresa recognized Ethan's bold handwriting on the envelope and took it to her room to read in private, away from her aunt's disapproving eyes. His words painted vivid pictures of life on the trail, the beauty of sunrise over the mountains, the challenges of crossing swollen rivers with nervous horses, the camaraderie around the campfire at night. But what touched Theresa most were the personal revelations scattered throughout. How he'd lost his parents to influenza when he was 16, how he'd worked his way up from stable boy to respected horseman, how he sometimes longed for a place to call his own. I find myself thinking of you often, he wrote near the end. Your smile has a way of appearing in my mind when the trail gets difficult. I hope this letter finds you well and that you'll honor me with a reply. Theresa wrote back that same night, sharing her own days, the monotony of small-town life, her decision to apply for the teaching position in Pine Junction, her growing restlessness. She confessed that she thought of him too, that their brief time together had shown her possibilities she hadn't considered before. Over the next weeks, they exchanged 2 more letters, each more personal than the last. In his third letter, Ethan mentioned a small ranch for sale near Flagstaff that he was considering. It would mean settling in one place, he wrote, something I haven't done in years. The thought both terrifies and attracts me. Theresa replied that she understood the feeling. Change is frightening, she wrote, but sometimes necessary for growth. 6 weeks stretched to 7, then 8. Theresa tried not to worry, knowing that trail work was unpredictable. She focused instead on preparing for her new position in Pine Junction, set to begin in September. Walter Donovan had married the banker's daughter from Prescott, and Theresa found, to her surprise, that the news caused her no pain at all. It was a scorching day in late June when she heard hoofbeats approaching the house. Looking up from her mending on the porch, she saw a familiar figure on a chestnut horse, and her heart seemed to stop before racing forward. Ethan looked trail-worn, but his smile was bright as he dismounted and approached the porch. "Miss Reed," he said formally, though his eyes held warmth that belied his tone. "I hope I find you well." "Very well, Mr. Lawson," she replied, matching his formality while fighting the urge to run down the steps into his arms. "You're later than expected. Had some trouble with river crossings," he explained, "and a detour I needed to make." He glanced toward the door. "Is your aunt at home?" "She's visiting the minister's wife," Theresa said. "Won't be back for hours." Ethan's smile widened as he climbed the porch steps. "Then perhaps I can speak freely." "Please do," Theresa invited, setting aside her mending. He took a seat beside her, removing his hat. "I've thought about what to say to you for miles," he admitted. "Practiced it even. But now that I'm here, the words seem inadequate." "Try anyway," she encouraged, her heart pounding. "Theresa," he began, "when I took your hand that night at the dance hall, I had no idea I'd be unable to let it go, even in my thoughts. Your letters, they've meant more to me than I can express. You've become important to me in ways I never expected." "You've become important to me too," she said softly. He reached for her hand then, his fingers warm against hers. "I made that detour I mentioned to look at that ranch near Flagstaff. I bought it." Theresa's eyes widened. "You did? It's not much," he cautioned. "A small house, good pasture, a creek running through it. But it has potential. It could be a home." The word home hung between them, laden with meaning. "I'm glad for you," Theresa said sincerely, though she felt a pang at the thought of him settling so far from Cottonwood Springs. "The thing is," Ethan continued, his grip on her hand tightening slightly, "I can see the ranch's potential, but I can't imagine living there alone. When I picture that home, Theresa, you're in it." Her breath caught. "Ethan, I know it's fast," he hurried on. "We've spent more time apart than together. But I've never been more certain of anything. I love you, Theresa Reed. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you placed your trust in me on what should have been the worst night of your life." Tears filled Theresa's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I knew it when you rode away that first time." Ethan's face lit up with joy. Then, to her surprise, he slid from the porch swing to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "I'm not a wealthy man," he said seriously. "I can't offer you fine things or an easy life. But I can promise to love you faithfully, to respect your dreams as my own, to build a life with you where we both can grow. Theresa Reed, will you marry me?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, Ethan, I will." He gathered her into his arms then, kissing her with a tenderness that made her previous engagement seem like a pale imitation of love. When they finally parted, Theresa was laughing through her tears. "What will your aunt say?" Ethan asked, his arms still around her waist. "Probably that I've lost my mind," Theresa admitted. "But I don't care. For once, I'm choosing my own path." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the town church. Unlike her planned wedding to Walter, this one was small, with only a few friends attending. Theresa wore a new blue dress instead of the elaborate white gown that held too many painful memories. As they exchanged vows, Ethan held her hand just as he had that first night, steady and sure. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Theresa felt not the anxiety she'd experienced with Walter, but a profound sense of rightness. The journey to their new home took several days by wagon. As they crested the final hill and the small ranch came into view, Ethan stopped the horses. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson," he said, pride evident in his voice. The house was modest but sturdy, with a covered porch and windows that caught the afternoon light. Behind it stretched meadows where horses could graze, and beyond that, the dark line of pine forest against the mountain backdrop. It's beautiful, Theresa breathed, taking in the sweep of land that was now their home. It needs work, Ethan cautioned. The house especially. Then we'll work, she said simply. Together. That first year was hard, as Ethan had warned it might be. They repaired the house room by room, built up the horse breeding business, learned the rhythms of their new life together. There were arguments, misunderstandings, nights when they went to bed exhausted from labor and worry. But there was also joy in shared accomplishments, in quiet evenings by the fire, in the deepening bond between them. Ethan kept his promises, supporting Theresa when she started a small school for the children of neighboring ranches, listening to her ideas for improving the business, treating her as a full partner in their shared enterprise. By their first anniversary, the ranch was beginning to prosper. They celebrated with a picnic by the creek that ran through their property, reminiscing about that first meeting and the unlikely path that had brought them together. Do you ever regret it? Ethan asked as they lay on a blanket, watching clouds drift across the Arizona sky. Marrying a man you barely knew instead of waiting for a more suitable match. Theresa propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. Never, she said firmly. Not for a single moment. Even when the roof leaked all winter. Or when that first foal died. Or when you had to wear the same 2 dresses for months because we couldn't afford new ones. She smiled, touching his face gently. Not even then. Because through all of it, you kept your promise from that very first night. Which promise was that? He asked, catching her hand and kissing the palm. You never let me face the hard times alone, she said softly. You kept hold of my hand, Ethan, just like you did at the dance. He pulled her down for a kiss, his arms strong around her. And I always will, he promised against her lips. 5 years later, the Lawson Ranch had grown into one of the most respected horse breeding operations in the territory. Their house had expanded too, with a new wing added to accommodate their growing family, a 3-year-old son, James, who had his father's eyes, and a baby daughter, Elizabeth, born just 6 months earlier. On a crisp October evening, Ethan returned from town with supplies and an unexpected surprise: a letter from Cottonwood Springs. It's from Clara Jenkins, Theresa said, recognizing the handwriting of her childhood friend. She read it quickly, her expression changing from curiosity to surprise. There's to be a harvest dance next month. Clara says Walter Donovan's bank failed, and he left town in disgrace. She thought I'd want to know. Ethan set their daughter in her cradle before responding. Does it bring back difficult memories? Theresa folded the letter, considering. Strangely, no. It feels like something that happened to someone else. She looked around at their comfortable home, at their sleeping children, at the man who had changed her life with a simple outstretched hand. I can't help thinking how differently things might have turned out if Walter hadn't left me at that dance. I thank God every day that he did, Ethan said, drawing her into his arms. Though I'd have found you somehow, Theresa Lawson. I'm certain of it. Are you now? She teased, settling against his chest. Absolutely, he confirmed. Some things are meant to be. Outside, the sun was setting over their land, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Inside, in the warmth of their home, Theresa silently agreed. Some things were indeed meant to be, like a cowboy taking the hand of a jilted bride and keeping it, through all the nights that followed, for the rest of their lives.